We're going to spin, exaggerate, distort, selectively cite evidence, cherry pick, all these subtle truth-bending tactics. Truth is not your primary concern. It's a side effect of your real goal.
Dr. David Pinsof is a social scientist at UCLA, as well as the co-creator of the game Cards Against Humanity and author of Everything is Bullshit on Substack, where he explores the evolutionary forces behind self-deception, belief, and human behavior. David Pinsof, welcome to the show. I'd like to begin with a quote from the great evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers. If deceit is fundamental to animal communication, then there must be strong selection to spot deception, and this ought, in turn, to select for a degree of self-deception, rendering some facts and motives unconscious, so as not to betray, by the subtle signs of self-knowledge, the deception being practiced. Thus, the conventional view that natural selection favors nervous systems, which produce ever more accurate images of the world, must be a very naive view of mental evolution. Essentially, what Trivers is saying is that the brain is specifically designed to self-deceive when useful, and that it is foolish and naive to assume that evolution would select for accuracy per se. What do you think about this?
I think it's a beautiful and intriguing and horrifying idea. We see this idea emerging in lots of science fiction movies. So Battlestar Galactica, the series, featured a prominent role for this idea with the Cylons, who were spies infiltrating the human spaceship, and they did not know that they were Cylons, so that they could more effectively blend in with the humans on the ship, and they fell in love, and then it was horrifying to them to learn that they had been a Cylon the whole time. So in that case, they were programmed to deceive themselves to effectively deceive others. There are other examples of this in popular culture. Total Recall has this idea where Arnold Schwarzenegger is sort of duped into thinking that he's one of the rebels when really he's working for the bad guy. Sorry if there's that's a spoiler, but it's an old movie. I'm trying to think of other examples of this. I'm blanking, but this idea has been around for a while, that we deceive ourselves in order to more effectively deceive others. There's a great moment in Seinfeld where George Costanza is hoping to pass a polygraph test and lie, and he's Jerry is trying to pass the polygraph test, and he's asking George for advice because he's such a great liar. And I believe George said, my whole life is a lie at one point, hilariously. And George is trying to counsel Jerry on how to lie effectively. And as he's as he's walking out the door, George says, "Remember, Jerry, it's not a lie if you believe it." Which again gets back to this idea that we're better at lying when we believe the lie.
Is there evidence to back this up?
Unfortunately, the evidence is kind of spotty. So one prediction of this theory is that we should be very, very good at detecting lies. And we should be less good at it when the person believes the lie, right? So the Robert Trivers evolutionary story is that there is an arms race between deceivers and deceived. And as deceivers get better and better at deceiving, the victims get better and better at spotting deception. So like beads of sweat or shifty eyes or subtle cues like that. These are the subtle signs of self-knowledge that Trivers refers to in the quote. And so the idea is that because it became so hard to lie without sort of leaking these cues, a new strategy emerged, which was to lie to oneself first and then lie to the other person so that you don't give off these cues. So this entails the prediction that we should be giving off lots of cues when we do consciously lie, and that people should be very good at spotting them. Unfortunately, the empirical evidence for this hypothesis is pretty thin. So there are tons of studies trying to figure out reliable cues of lying. So there's all this stuff on the polygraph test. Polygraph tests are probably unreliable. They don't really tell you whether a person is lying or not, despite what you might see in, crime dramas. And people have looked for all sorts of cues to deception. None of them are really reliable. People are actually pretty mediocre at figuring out when a person is lying or not. They're barely above chance in terms of their ability to guess whether someone's lying or not. So one key prediction of this model is starting to be falsified by a lot of empirical evidence. So I have a post called The Truth About Self-Deception where I try to revise this model in light of this evidence and offer a slightly different take. So I don't think that we so much lie to each other and lie to ourselves to do that more effectively. I think we bullshit other people and we bullshit ourselves to do that more effectively. So what's the difference between lying and bullshitting? Lying is when you intentionally say something that's false and you know that it's false, and you're doing it to manipulate the person for your self-interest, right? To bullshit, you don't necessarily know what's true or false. You don't even know that what you're saying, for all you know, it could be true, it could be false, doesn't matter. It's not so much that you know that it's false and you're saying it anyway, it's that you don't really know or care. You're just running your mouth and saying whatever you need to say to get what you want. Maybe some of it is true, maybe some of it is true-ish, maybe some of it is false. Who cares? Truth is not your primary concern. Insofar as you're telling the truth, it's a side effect of your real goal, which is to persuade or manipulate or seek status or gain forgiveness or whatever. So the goal is social. It's not epistemic. It's to win social rewards and not to accurately reveal the truth. So that's bullshitting. And I think bullshitting is way more effective at manipulating people than lying is. First and foremost, because lying has huge reputational costs. So if you get caught overtly lying, that could destroy your reputation. People could never trust you again. And if you're in a small-scale hunter-gatherer society, if your reputation is destroyed, you're dead. If you don't have social support, you're dead. So lying is a really risky strategy. So I would expect people to only lie as a last resort when all other attempts to bullshit and spin fail. Or when they are exceptionally powerful and they can get away with lying and no one has the temerity to challenge the lie. That's another condition where you might expect people to lie. But for the most part, we're going to bullshit and not lie. We're going to spin, exaggerate, distort, selectively cite evidence, cherry pick. All these subtle truth-bending tactics are going to be our method of choice for manipulating people. So this actually makes more sense of the self-deception story. I think what we're doing when we deceive ourselves is not so much deceiving ourselves, but practicing our bullshit story in front of the mirror, so to speak. So if you think of us as lawyers trying to argue for one side, either the prosecution or the defense, we're going to be very biased. We're only going to look for evidence that supports our side and damages the other side. And just as a good lawyer will practice their opening statement so that it's nice and polished before they approach the jury, we often practice our own opening statements in our heads. We ruminate, we play out hypothetical scenarios where people challenge us or accuse us of something, and then we whip out a ready-made response. We play out these scenarios in our heads, we rehearse, we practice our opening statements in anticipation of the trials that we might expect to encounter in our lives so that we're more prepared for them if and when they do arise. So if we're worried about other people accusing us of being a bad person, we might rehearse in our inner monologue all the ways that we're good people and that we have good intentions and that we're doing the right thing. If we're worried about being accused of being a status seeker or being selfish, we might rehearse a bullshit narrative in our head about how we're really pursuing some high-minded, noble ideal. And so what we do is we bullshit ourselves, or we work on our bullshit story in our heads in advance so that when we are put on the stand, so to speak, to give our bullshit story, we're well rehearsed. It comes out of our mouths smoothly. We seem persuasive and charismatic and compelling. So I think that's a much better story to tell about the evolution of so-called self-deception. I would think of it as self-persuasion or self-bullshitting rather than self-deception. And so one empirical prediction of this model is that we should be very good at spotting and detecting bullshitting and manipulation. So there's a different prediction of the Trivers model. The Trivers model predicts that we should be good at detecting lying and the subtle cues of lying. This model predicts that we should be very good at detecting bullshitting and subtle cues of bullshitting, and we should be resistant to being manipulated and exploited by others, and we should be really eager to figure out what their hidden agenda might be. And that prediction has actually received a lot of empirical support. So this is, I'm referring to the research of Hugo Mercier, who's a French psychologist. He has a wonderful book called Not Born Yesterday, where he reviews the evidence for this hypothesis and debunks the idea that humans are actually gullible fools. He shows that humans are actually deeply skeptical and deeply vigilant against the information that they receive. They're constantly paranoid about being deceived, about being lied to. They use a variety of subtle cues to figure out whether someone might have a hidden agenda. And then he goes through all the beliefs that might look on their face like they're a result of gullibility or foolishness, and he actually shows that they're not about gullibility or foolishness at all, that they're serving other social purposes that are unrelated to truth, or in some cases they flow directly from a skepticism or an over skepticism or hypervigilance against communicated information. So you might think conspiracy theories are a sign of gullibility, but actually it's the opposite. Conspiracy theories arise from a hyper-skepticism and hyper-vigilance against being deceived. You're constantly on the lookout for people trying to deceive you, and that's why you cook up the conspiracy theory, because it's a narrative of how everyone is trying to deceive you. So conspiracy theories don't stem from gullibility; they stem from its opposite. So I think this is a better story to tell about the evolution of self-deception. It's much more insightful to think of it as self-persuasion or self-bullshitting, and it has much more empirical evidence to stand on.
If people are not gullible and in fact skeptical and analyzing, why does it seem as though people are fooled so often and wrong all the time?
It's a beautiful question, really deep question. There are many possible answers to it. There's still a lot of research and debate on it, so I don't claim to have the last word on it. But the research on it as of late has argued that what looks like foolish beliefs or gullibility, they're not actually beliefs in the way that we would think of them as tracking reality and guiding behavior. They're more like social signals. They're more like clothing, actually. So we don't wear clothes so much to track reality. We sometimes, it tracks reality in the sense that when it's cold, we wear, more layers, and when it's warm, we wear, fewer layers. But that's only one function of clothing. The other function is social. So we try to wear things that make us look good or make us look fashionable. And I think our beliefs really work the same way, that we sometimes believe things not because we're trying to accurately track reality, but because we're trying to signal the kind of person we are, or we're trying to signal whose side we're on, or which faction we're most loyal to. And when we're using beliefs in that way, truth isn't really a relevant concern. What the relevant concern is how effectively does this help me signal the type of person I am or want to be, and how effectively does this help me signal whose side I'm on and which group I'm loyal to. And for that goal, it can sometimes be the case that truth is a bad thing. You might want a really absurd and outlandish belief to signal your loyalty, because if you're willing to tout an absurdity, that could be an especially strong signal that you're loyal to the group who promoted that absurdity. Because if I say something that other people will find weird and stupid and insane, but my in-group will find plausible and commendable, well, then that's going to alienate me from outsiders and endear me to insiders. And it's effectively going to be burning bridges to outside groups. And burning bridges is a really strong signal of loyalty to the group, because if I have no outside options, I'm never going to leave the group. So if I burn all my outside options, that's a really good signal that I'm going to be committed to the group and I'm going to stay with it. So a lot of the time, falsehood can be an asset for signaling group loyalty.
So in essence, the human social peacock tail is made of memes. We hold this, we hold this set of beliefs saying, "Look at me, I'm part of this group," or "I am high status," essentially showing I am a certain way because, and then they use the belief as evidence. Perhaps I'm very committed to this group, showing as evidence a belief, as you said, that is patently absurd or very hard to swallow.
Yes, exactly. And there's an interesting question that arises from this is when we believe things for social signaling reasons, do we quote unquote really believe it? So this is a live and ongoing debate in social science and philosophy, what it means to really believe something or to truly believe something. And so Hugo Mercier argues that when we adopt beliefs for signaling purposes, that we don't truly believe them in a way that guides our behavior. So he has a really interesting example of Pizzagate. So you remember Pizzagate, the conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton and her cronies were running a child sex trafficking ring out of a pizzeria in, I think, D.C. It's a preposterous story. Of all the places to run a sex trafficking ring, I would not choose a pizzeria in an urban metropolis. I would choose something far away from the authorities. Anyway, so if you truly believe that there are children tied up in the basement of this pizzeria, why on earth wouldn't you go and try to rescue the children, or at least, call the police, go there with some friends, kick down the door, get the children out of there? Like, if you truly believe the story, that's what you would do, right? Like, if there were kids locked up in some basement in my town, I would immediately do whatever I could to get those kids out of there. So the fact that millions of people apparently believed this preposterous story, and yet only one person, so far as I'm aware, actually acted on it. So there's one guy who actually went to the pizzeria with a gun and was like, "Where are the kids? Let's get them out of here." And where's the basement? Of course, there was no basement. Hilariously,
the basement had pepperoni and not children.
Yeah, just pepperoni. Yeah, and he was acting. So I think that guy actually believed the story because he acted like a real person would act if they believed the story. But the fact that it's one person out of millions that truly acted on it suggests that the rest of those people didn't truly believe the story. I think the worst, people would leave 1-star Yelp reviews on the pizzeria as if that was an effective measure to take it's preposterous. But what he argues is that most of the people who quote unquote believe the Pizzagate story don't actually believe the Pizzagate story in a way that guides their behavior. Maybe that one guy did, and maybe he was, mentally ill in some way, but the rest of them didn't truly believe it. They were just believing it for signaling purposes. So he makes a distinction between what's called reflective beliefs and intuitive beliefs. Reflective beliefs are beliefs that we think we believe, and we believe because members of our group believe it. But we don't really believe it on an intuitive level in a way that guides our behavior. There are other phrases that have been used to describe this kind of belief. The philosopher Neil Van Leeuwen calls them credences. They've also been referred to as schmeliefs. There are a number of ways of thinking about this, and there's debate about whether we have this category. Some people think that all our beliefs are true beliefs, and there is no such thing as as a fake belief. I personally am partial to the idea that we do have this separate category of belief that doesn't guide our behavior. I think it's better to think of it as a pseudo belief, where the goal is to mimic the appearance of a belief to gain social rewards. And I think once you properly understand human psychology, the idea of a pseudo belief is kind of inevitable. So we have these social motivations to look good and to look loyal to our group. And it would be surprising if those motivations didn't apply to saying things and doing things to suggest that we believe certain statements. So I think we have these pseudo beliefs that try to masquerade as beliefs, and oftentimes we think that they're real beliefs. So we believe that we believe something, but we don't actually believe it. Because in our efforts to persuade others that we truly believe it, we sometimes persuade ourselves as well. And so we think we really believe it, but actually we don't.
This is actually what the cause, or I suppose the beginning of what moved me away from religion when I was younger. I realized at one point, if I really truly believed in God, why am I not reading scriptures for hours every single day? And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to ensure that it's actually correct. And so I ended up doing somewhat of a deep dive into theology and that sort of thing. This was years back, and I ended up, moving away from it. But if people don't have these credence type beliefs, they sure act like they do, because they say things like they believe in a deity that is the most important and powerful deity, superlative to everything else, and then they spend about an hour or two dedicated to such a deity. Or they believe in some conspiracy theory and then presume that they're doing something by talking about it on the internet, instead of actually going out and changing things if there is, in fact, a satanic cabal or something along those lines running the world.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Hugo Mercier in his book has another argument that he makes, which is that if you truly believe that there was a powerful conspiracy that was controlling world events, the conspirators could easily track you down and eliminate you. And yet people who hold these conspiracy theories often do so publicly. They hold public conferences to discuss their conspiracy theories in hotel lobbies and prominent hotel chains. Like, they make no effort to conceal themselves or flee the country, or like normal whistleblowers on conspiracies often have to go in hiding and are terrified of being found out by the conspirators. But actual conspiracy theorists don't act like whistleblowers at all. They act like they don't actually believe that there's a conspiracy out to get them. So that's another argument in favor of the idea that they don't truly believe these things. They might believe they believe these things, but they don't truly believe them. You also mentioned religion. I think another potential argument you could make for this view is that if you truly believed that you were going to a paradise of infinite pleasures beyond your wildest dreams after you died, you would be really excited to die. You'd be pumped about dying. Like, imagine how excited you'd be to go see your favorite movie or eat your favorite food or go to Disneyland or whatever, and multiply that by infinity. That's how excited you'd be to die. And yet no one is excited to die, so far as I'm aware, who believes in heaven. And that suggests to me that they don't truly believe in heaven deep down. Most people are terrified to die. They are not excited about it at all. So that is another argument you could make, that a lot of our beliefs don't really run so deep.
I'm sure that people at this point are thinking, I have access to my own head. I know that I'm not doing these things for status, but I do them for, value X, value Y, value Z, for altruism, for ethics, because of my philosophy, and whatever panoply of things that people ascribe the status of motivations and values to. So people might be thinking, why listen to this David Pinsof guy?
Yeah, you certainly don't have to. You can listen to something else right now if you want. But if you're still here, you must be interested in what I have to say. I think I have some useful insights on human psychology and status motivation. The proof is in the pudding. If you find this insightful, if you find it sheds a lot of light on things that you would have otherwise found confusing, if it helps you explain and predict things in human society, then that's a good sign that it's true. So yeah, the proof is in the pudding.
The listener may say, I may think it's interesting, or I may think that it's insightful and all these things, but how can I even believe myself in the first place? Is there a specific reason to believe this specific worldview, this paradigm, as opposed to other ones?
I think so. And, my blog is largely about, giving the evidence and the arguments for these positions. I think, we'd have to go through the specifics of which claims we want to discuss. But yeah, I think so.
On the specific topic of bullshitting and self-bullshitting, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there a particularly good reason that people should assume that they are constantly bullshitting themselves, as opposed to doing things for any other given reasons? Any reasons other than directly evolutionary ones, such as status and the like?
Yeah, if you believe in the theory of evolution, which you should, because it's true, and if you believe that humans evolved by natural selection, and the human brain, and thus the human mind and emotional life evolved by natural selection, then this just falls naturally out of that view. You cannot believe that the human brain and nervous system and emotional life and motivational systems, that these things came from evolution, and yet we have emotions and motivations that are completely unrelated to things that would have enhanced our survival and reproduction in ancestral environments. So I think this just follows logically from reflecting on the fact that evolution is true and humans evolved by natural selection. So that's, for me, the main argument. So I have a post called Darwin the Cynic, where I basically argue that reflecting on the truth of evolution and our evolutionary origins has some inherently cynical implications about human nature. Because if you realize that our deepest motivations and drives and emotions come from evolution, then that constrains the shape that they should take. That allows for some shapes to emerge and prevents other shapes from emerging. So you would expect us to have emotions and motivations that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce, or helped our kin survive and reproduce. So you would expect our motivations to be selfish, to be nepotistic, and in some cases to be tribal or groupish, insofar as there is intergroup competition for power, status, or resources. So I make the case that at the heart of human psychology is selfishness, nepotism, and tribalism. And if we are good evolutionists, those are basically the key forces behind our motivations and emotions. Other high-minded motivations to make the world a better place or to generally help everyone, those don't really make any evolutionary sense. So for that reason, I think taking an evolutionary perspective steers you in a somewhat cynical direction. And I think we understand this cynical perspective when it comes to, say, evaluating corporations. So I believe Starbucks' mission statement is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. Obviously, we all know that that's bullshit. If we're trying to predict what Starbucks is going to do next, we're not going to ask ourselves, what would inspire and nurture the human spirit? We're going to ask ourselves, what will make Starbucks the most money? And we're going to have a much easier time predicting Starbucks' actions if we take that brute force economic perspective than if we try to figure out what it means to inspire or nurture a human spirit and use that to predict Starbucks' actions. I think we should view humans in a similar way. I think humans have PR systems built into their brains, and they serve much the same function that the Starbucks PR system serves, and that they paint our motives and our motivations in lofty, high-minded rhetoric. They try to make us look more altruistic and impartial than we really are. They cover up our unflattering motives in the same way that Starbucks tries to cover up Starbucks' unflattering motives. And if we only listen to the PR systems in our heads, and the PR systems control what we say. So if we only listen to the PR systems, then we're going to have a very biased and distorted and misleading picture of human nature and human society. In the same way that if we wanted to understand the economic world and all we looked at was the PR divisions of every company, and we just tried to predict companies' behavior based on their mission statements and their PR campaigns and their ads, we'd be extremely confused about economics. We would utterly fail to predict anything going on in the economic domain. And I think we're similarly confused about human psychology when we take all of our bullshit narratives at face value. I think we need to go deeper to the unflattering Darwinian motives. And I think we need to get more cynical about each other, at least when we're trying to predict and explain human behavior. You don't necessarily need to be a cynic in your everyday life. I think it might actually be a bad idea. But when we're trying to understand and explain, I think cynicism is a really helpful and underrated perspective.
I very much agree with the fact that, well, it's a little bit hard to read philosophy of human nature circa before 100 years ago or so, because there's a lot of opining, a lot of just assertions about virtue and that kind of thing, moralizing. And I mean, frankly, you can't fault the people. They were very bright, but they just had no real idea. I mean, just think about over 200 years ago, there was no theory of evolution. It didn't even really exist in any meaningful sense. And likewise, no neuroscience. So people had no idea how the machinery of life and experience actually worked. So I think that there's definitely excellent merit to be had in an analysis of I suppose, both the organ of experience and the human body in general, and then also the process that shaped it, because those are somewhat inextricable. You can't entirely understand the machine itself without understanding what the pieces are for and how they came about. For example, if an alien encountered a car randomly, the alien wouldn't understand much, but if it saw humans getting in the cars and using them for transportation, that would shed light. It would elucidate all kinds of things about the mechanics of the car. I'd say, is the cynical perspective necessarily the most accurate one? Couldn't you say that perhaps just as birth control is certainly not adaptive, we adapted for sex, say, well, we adapted the pleasure of sex for reproduction, you could say, and yet we use birth control because we have this base machinery, but then we have all the ideas that we throw on top of it, which allow us to a little bit of flexibility. At the end of the day, we still work for our imperatives and we still do things for the way our brain is programmed. Like, even if people believe in free will, say, they still use their free will to do roughly the same things, be with people, gain some status, maybe preserve their biology. It's roughly the same things. Career. So
Right.
even with such free will, we do roughly the same things. Couldn't you say that perhaps we're similar to how we co-opted sex away from reproduction and more toward personal enjoyment? Couldn't there be some co-opting of using human intelligence, a co-opting of our drives for perhaps community or reciprocal altruism? As they make us feel good, perhaps we could co-opt them to push it further, to actually have benevolent motivations.
Yeah, I think we can incentivize different forms of behavior and better forms of social organization. But at the end of the day, those incentives are going to be rooted in our evolved drives. So, like, what is a social norm? A social norm is when you gain status for obeying the norm and when you lose status for flouting the norm. So norms are ultimately rooted in our evolved drive for status. So insofar as we want to change norms, we have to pull the levers of status. Insofar as you want to change any aspect of human society, you have to pull on the levers of our selfish, nepotistic, tribal, Darwinian motives. There are no other levers to pull. So yes, we can give people selfish rewards for doing things that help the community. You could think of the marketplace as a good set of incentives where I get paid the more value I provide to other people at the lowest possible price. I make more profit and I facilitate more reciprocal, mutually beneficial exchanges. So you can think of the marketplace as having a good set of incentives that promote community, productivity, and innovation and well-being. Similarly, you could think of the status games surrounding science as promoting the pursuit of truth. So I don't think scientists have a overwhelming primary devotion to truth for its own sake, although they might claim they do. At the end of the day, their behavior is going to be guided by their status motivations. What kinds of research is going to get them status? What kinds of methods are going to get them status? They're going to try to publish in the best journals, go to the prestigious institutions. They want to win those awards. They want to get tenure. These are going to be guiding the average scientist's behavior much more than an abstract love of truth. And if we want to reform scientific institutions, we have to be aware of those unflattering motivations, because those are the levers we need to pull to change the system. If science currently isn't optimally producing true and unbiased information, then the way to change science so that it is better at promoting true, unbiased information is to somehow give scientists more status for producing that kind of information and less status for producing bullshit. So in response to your question, yes and no, we do have the power to redesign our societies and change our incentives. But in order to do that effectively, we need to take an appropriately cynical perspective about human nature.
Right. And I would say, to clarify, I am by no means suggesting that humans are these wonderful creatures. We simply are as we are. And a part of that is, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, shown now to be motivations for status and for personal gain and to, in essence, fulfill the rewards for which our brain is built. And you mentioned incentives. I found your post on incentives to be very interesting. So How does human behavior work in 5 words or less?
Human behavior behavior is determined by incentives. There you go.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's almost tautological, like it's almost circular, but I think it is still meaningful. Some tautologies are actually meaningful, like it is what it is. What's done is done. They're perfectly circular and meaningless, and yet they have meaning because we're so full of shit. Sometimes hearing a circular tautology can jolt us out of our bullshit. And I think behavior is determined by incentives is a similar kind of meaningful tautology that jolts us out of our bullshit. So what do I mean by incentives? Incentives are just the things that we evolved to want. It's just our evolved drives and motivations. So food, sex, status, resources, comfort, health, safety, all the things that we evolved to want as animals. Those are our incentives. And so our behavior is determined by those incentives. Our behavior is determined by the things we want. We go out and get the things we want. It's almost meaningless. It's obviously true that our behavior is determined by what we want and the things we want, and where those things are distributed in space and time. Right. So if you wanted to predict human behavior, you would do a very good job of predicting it if you just knew what humans wanted and where those things were distributed across space and time. Right. You might not be able to predict human behavior perfectly, but you'd be able to predict the general direction that things would take. So that is the perspective that I think is going to be most insightful in understanding human society, human culture, social change. Follow the incentives, follow the basic Darwinian drives that are steering our behavior, and you will go a long way toward understanding the human condition.
Do you think incentives drive everything? Everything humans do?
Maybe not everything, but the vast majority. I don't know, like your patellar reflex when the doctor hits your knee and you kick your leg outward. Would you call that an incentive? I don't know. That's just a reflex. Sometimes we do things by accident. If I stutter while I'm talking to you, I don't think that is really caused by my incentive. I didn't want to stutter. It just happened because shit happens. So there's lots of randomness. I would say it doesn't explain randomness. So there's a lot of stuff that just happens for no reason or by accident. Stuttering, sweating. Well, I guess sweating has a evolved function in regulating body temperature. But random turns of events, those things can't be explained by incentives because what's unpredictable is by definition unpredictable. I'm talking about the predictable parts of the human condition, the parts that are systematic, that can be explained. There are inexplicable things that can't be explained by definition, but I'm talking about the stuff that can be explained, the stuff that it is worth our while to try to understand. And when it comes to those things, the systematic parts of the human condition, the predictable parts of the human condition, all of those things can be explained by incentives.
So roughly, would you say the telic actions, essentially things people do for a reason? The stuttering, I'm sure technically there is a reason, as in there is a cause, but what I mean more so is motivated action toward a specific end. That's more where incentives come in?
Yes.
The incentives being the ends themselves.
It's basically just, everything, most of what we do is determined by what we want, right? If incentives are what we want, then, most of what we do is determined by our incentives.
So in essence, we want what we want. Shocker.
Yeah. Yes. Big shocker. It is a tautology. It's like it is what it is, or what's done is done, but I think it is a meaningful tautology.
And that's where I think that evolution and neuroscience and also orthodox psychology, so non-evolutionary psychology, can be quite useful in telling us a bit more about ourselves, because there is a surprising amount that goes subliminal under the threshold of awareness. It's kind of shocking when you look at it. When you look at people being, for example, priming, when I first encountered it, was completely shocking to me. I thought that cannot be true. But then it shows up enough times, you realize, well, how can it not be true?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the priming literature hasn't been replicating so well.
Really?
Yes. So the idea that you can flash the word old or senior or retirement or whatever, and that causes you to walk more slowly, that's bullshit. That hasn't replicated. Other kinds of priming where you do subtle primes and it like hugely changes your behavior, it's looking like that stuff is not holding up so well.
So we can't turn people into hyper consumers or killing machines by flashing words in movies?
No, unfortunately, we cannot. So all the subliminal messages you've been priming your listeners with, I'm afraid, have not been effective.
Well, I'm going to have to fire my resident psychologist. So he didn't tell me that. Let's talk about the meaning of life.
Okay.
Let's go deep. What do you think about the meaning of life?
There are two ways to approach that topic. One is in a more emotional sense. So sometimes things feel meaningful. Pursuits, endeavors, ambitions, aspirations can feel meaningful. And the feeling of meaning motivates us to pursue that end in the face of obstacles and setbacks and discomforts. So when I'm thinking about what feels meaningful, I'm thinking about stuff like, raising a family, raising my children to maturity and independence and success, or having a long-term committed romantic relationship, or cultivating a reputation as a virtuous person in my community so that people trust me and are in debt to me and will help me when I'm in need. Those kinds of goals are seen as meaningful. Regrettably, helping our tribe vanquish and dominate rival tribes also feels meaningful. There's a book, I forget the author, called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. I think that's literally correct. I think when we see ourselves as heroes fighting against villains, that can bring us a tremendous amount of meaning. So ideologies, religions, that can bring us meaning. Working to increase the solidarity and formidability and cohesion of our groups, that gives us a lot of meaning. So basically what I think the evolutionary function of meaning is to cause us to pursue long-term fitness-enhancing goals in the face of obstacles and setbacks and discomforts. So a meaningful goal is one that is a really valuable goal from an evolutionary perspective. The most obvious one would be rearing offspring to maturity. And the feeling of meaning helps you pursue that goal even when it's a pain in the ass. So I have a daughter. She often throws tantrums. She can often be a pain in the ass. But because I find the goal of raising her to be a successful adult a meaningful goal, I'm willing to persist in the face of those annoyances and inconveniences. And that's what I think the function of meaning is. So something that might otherwise be overwhelmingly annoying and upsetting, when I have meaning on my side, I can weather those storms. So that's the emotional sense of meaning. And I think we all have that kind of meaning. And when we're missing it, we feel depressed or without purpose or alienated or whatever. And I think we really do care about that kind of meaning for obvious Darwinian reasons. Like obviously we want to have, we want to care for our families. And we want to, form cohesive tribes and cultivate a good reputation. Those are meaningful pursuits to us. It explains why donating to charity and spending time with family and political activism all give us a sense of meaning. Interestingly, there's a psychology study showing that hatred actually correlates with meaning. So the more you hate the political outgroup, the more meaningful your life feels. So that's a kind of downside of meaning. Meaning isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Meaning can be quite dark. I'm sure the Nazis felt that their lives were very meaningful. And the same thing goes for any villainous group throughout history. I think it is very hard to rally and coordinate a group of normal human beings to commit atrocities without giving them some kind of uplifting, morally elevating narrative. I think we need these self-righteous stories to commit evil. Morality is our primary means of being immoral, I think. So I have a post called "Morality is Not Nice," where I talk about this dark side of morality. In any case, back to meaning. That's the emotional side of meaning. We all have it. It's a part of human nature. There's a different way of approaching meaning, which is the more highfalutin way. The things that philosophers talk about. The things like Sartre and Camus talk about. These are your late night dorm room bowl sessions where we talk about what's the meaning of it all, and we get into debates about what the purpose of humanity is. That kind of meaning is actually a little weirder. So I don't think everyone cares about that kind of meaning, about having those kinds of intellectual discussions about what the meaning of life is. A lot of people, when I bring up the topic of the meaning of life, they kind of roll their eyes or they get bored or, oh yeah, whatever. So I think debates and intellectual philosophizing about the meaning of life is not common to all humans, but is only common among a relatively small subset of humans who are very good at reasoning. So what an intellectual is, I think, is a person who has a very well-developed sense of reasoning. And what is reasoning? Well, we talked about Hugo Mercier's work on people not being gullible. He has this wonderful book, Not Born Yesterday. He also has another wonderful book with Dan Sperber called The Enigma of Reason. And he takes an evolutionary approach to reasoning. And he basically argues that reasoning did not evolve for solitary, rational contemplation. It evolved for social purposes. It evolved not to help us make better decisions as individuals, but to convince other people of what we want to convince them of and to rationalize and justify our behavior in their eyes. Reasoning is social. Insofar as we do converge on good decisions and good solutions to our problems, it is by reasoning in a group of people and exchanging arguments, and each one of those arguments might be biased and dumb and lazy, but because we're better at spotting the stupidity in other people's arguments than our own arguments, if we exchange arguments, we can collectively arrive at a better solution. He describes it as kind of a division of epistemic labor, where if we each specialize in our own one-sided arguments and we put them together, collectively we might arrive at a better decision. So people actually reason much better when they're forced to debate with other people than when they reason on their own, which suggests that reasoning is a social adaptation and not an individual adaptation. So if reasoning is social and it's about arguing and rationalizing and justifying, then intellectuals are the people who are really good at arguing and rationalizing and justifying. And when they talk about the meaning of life, I think what they're doing is they are playing a game where they interrogate each other about why they're doing things. They're asking for rationalizations and justifications, and they keep persistently asking for them more and more. Why did you do this? Why did you do this? Well, why did you do that? And you keep going down the chains of why. And because intellectuals like to look virtuous and sophisticated to each other, they respond to these interrogations with high-minded abstract rhetoric about wisdom and virtue and sacred values instead of the grubby, unflattering motives that they actually have. So when you get these hyper repetitive rounds of interrogation and rationalization, you get this flowery philosophical discourse about the meaning of life. And I think that flowery philosophical discourse is bullshit.
I think that my position is largely aligned with yours. I'd say there's indisputably meaning. I use the terminology, I think Paul Bloom is where I heard this from, but essentially a distinction between meaning of life and meaning in life. Mm-hmm. Meaning in life being indisputably true, that some people perceive their lives as meaningful and some people don't. That's what you seem to be calling emotional meaning. It's a sort of perceived importance. Perhaps I've perused the meaning literature in a very cursory manner, but it seems that meaning is something like a way of coherently modeling and explaining the world. So a reduction of uncertainty, perhaps. And then on top of that, a solid framework for significance, perhaps a value framework. Essentially, this is important, these things are not. Maybe this group is important, this group is not. And then on top of that, a purpose, something to do that is significant, a way to act toward those values. So that seems to be roughly meaning in life. And if you have any disagreements, feel free to push back. And then meaning of life would be essentially, why are we here? What put us here? What's the point of life? And I'm a tad disappointed with philosophy thus far. But then again, it seems that perhaps it's, I don't entirely know what I think about meaning of life, but at the moment, it seems to be a bit of a dismal and potentially misguided pursuit, looking for something in a neutral universe where there is nothing. And in fact, perhaps value is merely a neurological creation, a mechanism to keep us focused on the right things and ignoring everything else.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the fact that what gives us meaning in life is so perfectly correlated with what you would expect to give us meaning in life from an evolutionary perspective suggests that this is a creation of evolution and our deepest motivations. This is a product of the brain, if you will. Meaning isn't written into the fabric of the cosmos; it's written into our nervous systems, and it is a product of our evolutionary heritage. That might be disappointing for some people who are hoping that meaning is somehow out there in reality and stitched into the universe. It's kind of weird that we have that hope. Like, why do we care whether meaning is sort of out there or in here? I'm not sure. I think one possibility is that if it's out there, it helps us coordinate as a group on what is important and what isn't. And when we're well coordinated as a group, that feels good. So we want to agree on what is meaningful in life so that we could all be rowing in the same direction. That might be part of it. That might be why we want it to be outside of us so that other people can see it too. If it's just inside of us, then it's going to be harder for us to share it with other people. And it's going to be harder for us to be superior to other people and for our group to be superior. So if our meaning is just subjective and it's just culturally arbitrary, then there's no way for our meaning to be better than the outgroup's meaning. But if meaning is objective and part of reality, well, then if we know what it is, then we get to be superior. We get to be the ones who are in the know. And the outgroup is deluded and foolish for missing what is truly meaningful. So I think the objectivity helps us, ironically, compete for status at both the individual and the intergroup level.
That's what I was going to add, was the individual level. It also provides a shared metric for who is more meaningful or more, more in line with values, more righteous, and then whatever valued metric than the rest.
Yeah.
Before we end this, I have one final question. It seems that people are rather poor at following the injunction of the Delphic Oracle to know themselves. This injunction, know thyself. People seem not to be very good at it. So how would you recommend that people get a more true understanding of themselves?
Well, I would read the work of Dr Pinsof, who's a really smart guy and has a lot of important insights on who we are as a species. I would recommend his blog, Everything is Bullshit, which you can find at everythingisbullshit.blog.
And in the description.
And in the show notes. Aside from me, I would recommend the broader discipline of evolutionary psychology, which I think is the best way to understand human nature and the human condition. I honestly see no other way, given that we are animals and we are products of evolution. It seems insane to me that we would try to understand ourselves while ignoring evolution and our evolutionary history. That seems like a very fruitless exercise. So I would recommend anything in evolutionary psychology. I would recommend the works, the two books I mentioned in the episode by Hugo Mercier, Not Born Yesterday and The Enigma of Reason. Both fantastic books. They're a bit challenging for the everyday person, but I think they're well worth the intellectual effort. That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why we should read this Pinsof guy's stuff, though, because as far as I'm aware, he's just the co-creator of Cards Against Humanity, so I don't know what he has to offer. Dr. Pinsof, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
If you like this episode, I think you'll like one of these two episodes here. Also, please subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast, as it is the single best way for me to get more and better guests on the show.